Today on M. Dominic's Tales from Under the Floor, we have a very scary true story. It's called The Late Shift.
This story happened about a year ago, but it still keeps me up at night. I was working the late shift at a 24-hour gas station outside a small desert town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing really happens after 10 p.m. My shift started at midnight, and I was always the only one working. It was usually quiet, occasional truckers stopping by for gas, but that night something felt off. It was around 2 a.m., the deadest part of the night. I hadn't had a customer in hours, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was starting to lull me into a daze. I was leaning against the counter, flipping through an old magazine when I heard it, a light knock on the glass window. At first I thought I was hearing things, but then it came again, more deliberate this time. I looked up and there was a man standing outside by the door. He wasn't moving, just staring. His face was pale, and the way he was standing, perfectly still, gave me chills. I forced a smile and waved him in, but he didn't move. He just kept staring. I thought maybe he was waiting for me to open the door, but the station's doors weren't locked. I started to get a bad feeling. Something about the way he was standing there, not moving, was making me uneasy. After what felt like minutes, he finally walked in. He was tall, wearing a raincoat and a hat like a detective from an old movie, but his eyes were sunken, almost like he hadn't slept in days. He walked straight to the counter, but didn't say anything, just stood there staring at me with this strange blank expression. I asked if he needed anything, but he didn't respond. Not at first. After a few seconds, he finally spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper.
I need a ride.
There was something off about the way he said it. It wasn't just the words, but the tone. Like he was asking me for something more. I told him I couldn't leave the station, but there was a taxi service nearby if he needed one. He didn't react. He just stood there staring at me. I was starting to feel really uncomfortable, so I grabbed the phone and started dialing the taxi company. That's when I noticed his reflection in the window. Behind him, through the glass, there was someone else. A figure, standing in the shadows just outside the station. But when I glanced up from the phone, there was no one there. Just empty parking lot. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. I told the guy the taxi was on its way, but he didn't seem to care. He just kept staring, his eyes never leaving mine. Then he leaned in across the counter and whispered something I'll never forget.
We need to go now.
I felt my blood run cold. I asked him what he meant, but he just smiled, a slow, unsettling smile, and turned to leave. He walked out the door, and I watched him disappear into the darkness. A few minutes later, the taxi showed up, but the man was nowhere to be seen. The driver looked confused. There was no trace of him, like he had never been there in the first place. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see that pale face staring back at me from the darkness. I never saw him again, but sometimes, late at night when the station is empty, I still hear that knock on the window. Soft, deliberate, and I always wonder, what would have happened if I had left with him? Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what we see, but what waits for us when no one's watching.
If you liked this video and would like to see more, make sure that you like, subscribe, and comment.